In the Mountain View Park neighborhood of Rathfarnham, in South Dublin, there stood a completely ordinary house. The former couple, their son Richard O'Connor, their daughter Louise O'Connor with her children, and their partners all lived there at the same time. The house was small, yet at least 10 people lived there at any given time. In such cramped conditions, everyday problems quickly escalated into conflicts and tension. Patricia O'Connor was a retired woman who had worked her entire life as a nurse in a city hospital. She was strict, reserved, and tired of life. She had bought the house she lived in with her own savings. It was there that she had raised her children and spent most of her life. After divorcing her husband, Augustine O'Connor, Patricia moved away for a while. She began a new relationship and lived separately, but later returned. The new relationship did not work out, and she had nowhere else to live. Her ex-husband allowed her to move back into the house. Although they were no longer a couple, they continued living under the same roof, like two neighbors. They barely spoke to each other, but shared the same living space. Augustine, whom everyone called Gus, was quiet and distant. He barely took part in household chores, avoided conflict, and tried to stay out of everything. His indifference appealed to the neighbors, but only made the situation worse. Patricia's relationship with her daughter Louise was strained. Louise lived there with her 5 children by different men. She did not work, did not help with the housework, and often argued with her mother. One of her daughters, Stephanie O'Connor, was a teenager, almost always quiet and withdrawn. The other children were younger and did not take part in the family conflicts, but lived in the same environment. Kieran Green, Louise's current partner, also lived in the house. He did not work, was irritable and rude, and constantly argued with Patricia. He did not follow her rules, did not help with the housework, and aroused her suspicions. The relationship between the two was cold from the very beginning. In addition to the permanent residents, Keith Johnston, Louise's former partner and the father of her 2 older children, regularly appeared there. He did not live with them, but often visited the house. His role in the family went unnoticed for a long time, but later it became clear that he knew much more than it had seemed. Thus, the former spouses, their adult son, their adult daughter, 5 grandchildren, the daughter's partner, and the former son-in-law were all connected to one house. Despite her age, Patricia continued to take care of the household, cooking, cleaning, and doing all the necessary chores. The others took this for granted and rarely helped. Neither Gus, Louise, nor Kieran took on any responsibility. The house became cramped, noisy, and unmanageable. Gradually, Patricia began to feel that she was losing control. No one listened to her. Her requests were ignored, and every remark was met with annoyance. She felt no longer needed in the home she had built. And although it was not said openly, that very feeling was the first warning sign. In that house, no one wanted to change anything, but no one accepted someone else's authority either. Patricia did not make demands that seemed excessive. She asked people to clean up after themselves, not to leave dirty dishes lying around, not to leave things scattered throughout the house, and to follow the rules. In return, she received silence, indifference, and lazy irritation. None of the adults took her instructions seriously, and her requests sounded like annoying remarks that no one considered important. Kieran openly avoided speaking to her. He pretended not to hear her, even when she addressed him directly. Louise preferred not to get involved. When tensions in the house rose, she withdrew or accused her mother of being too strict. No one supported Patricia. The house was in disorder, but only she tried to tidy it up. No one followed the daily routine she had established. She was the first to get up, prepare breakfast, do the laundry, and tend the garden. The others got up late, left a mess behind them, and did not respond to comments. Even the children, young as they were, sensed that the rules in that house were no longer working. The family no longer functioned as a whole. Everyone lived according to their own schedule, without regard for the others. There were no more shared conversations. There were hardly any everyday or emotional bonds left. The house that had once connected everyone had now turned into a closed space where people shared the square footage but not the responsibilities. May 29, 2017, was no different from any other day. There were no loud arguments, no emergency calls, no recorded screams. But on that very day, Patricia O'Connor stopped leaving the house, stopped answering calls, and stopped appearing in any of the places she had previously visited regularly. None of her relatives considered her disappearance an immediate cause for alarm. The first person to speak openly about it was Patricia's sister Valerie. A few days later, while walking her dog near the O'Connor's house, she met Gus. During the conversation, he told her that Patricia had left the house with a suitcase and had not returned. According to him, this had happened on the evening of May 29. He added that Kieran and Richard had already filed a police report. This information greatly confused Valerie. She knew her sister and knew that suddenly disappearing without warning was not in Patricia's character. Patricia could not have left her grandchildren behind without telling her relatives. She had never disappeared before, was always reachable, and never made spontaneous decisions. After receiving the report, the Irish police initiated the standard procedure. They checked hospitals, hotels, and shelters. All attempts to find any lead were unsuccessful. Her bank card had not been used. No calls had been made from her phone. There was no information about Patricia's movements after her reported disappearance. Investigators asked Louise for a photo of her mother in order to launch a public search. This was the first time Patricia's disappearance became known outside her home. Until then, no one except her immediate family knew about her disappearance. The situation seemed strange. A person had disappeared, but there was no concern in the family. No one organized a search. Relatives living in other parts of Ireland began taking action on their own. They contacted each other, called acquaintances, and reached out to the media. But there was no information about Patricia's whereabouts. No one had seen her. They remembered her habits and tried to retrace her routes, but found no clues. Almost a week passed. The house from which, according to the family, Patricia had disappeared was not searched. There were no signs of violence, no evidence of conflict, and no threats. Based on the information available at that time, there was formally no reason to classify the disappearance as suspicious, but there was also no indication of a voluntary disappearance. At that point, investigators were already beginning to doubt the credibility of the family's statements. There was no exact time of her disappearance. There were no witnesses who could confirm that they had seen Patricia on the day she disappeared. Even the claim that she had taken a suitcase with her was not supported by video recordings or witness statements. The early stage of the investigation was complicated by the lack of facts and the lack of active support from the next of kin. What at first glance appeared to be the strange disappearance of an elderly person was now taking on a different shape. Behind the outward passivity lay something greater. No one in the family had mentioned that the house was under video surveillance from a neighboring property. Cameras had been installed on one of the neighboring buildings, covering both the facade and the backyard. All the neighbors knew about this, including the residents of the O'Connor's house. A few days after Patricia's disappearance, the police obtained the recordings from those cameras. Upon reviewing them, something strange emerged. On the evening of May 29, a woman left the house carrying a suitcase. She walked calmly down the street and returned about half an hour later. At first glance, it looked like someone preparing for a trip had simply left the house in a completely normal way. But upon closer inspection, it became clear that the person in the video was not Patricia, but her granddaughter Stephanie. She was wearing her grandmother's clothes and moved cautiously, as if she wanted to avoid being noticed. These actions had clearly been orchestrated in advance. The footage from the neighbor's camera revealed not only an attempt to fake a voluntary departure, but also the coordinated actions of those involved. Stephanie's recorded return through the backyard became one of the most important pieces of evidence. The attempt to create the appearance that Patricia had left the house on her own was deliberately staged in order to mislead the police and avoid an immediate search of the home. A further review of the video footage confirmed that Patricia had not left the house on the day of her disappearance, nor before it. It also emerged that family members had used her cell phone after May 29 to send messages, creating the impression that she was away. This information was not immediately made public, but later formed the basis for the charge of obstructing justice. Each of the adults living in the house had been assigned a role. Kieran told the police that Patricia had left. Louise provided a photograph and supported the version of her alleged departure. Gus repeated the same story without expressing any doubt. None of them questioned the truth of what had happened, even though no one had seen Patricia on the day of her disappearance. This coordinated silence and willingness to support the shared version became a characteristic feature of their behavior. A review of the statements also revealed inconsistencies. Louise claimed that her mother's departure was not unexpected and that there had been conflicts, but she did not point to any concrete incident. Gus said that Patricia had wanted to move away, but could not say where. Kieran referred to the tense atmosphere in the house. At the same time, something else emerged. There was no indication in the house that Patricia had wanted to leave. All her belongings were still there: clothes, medication, documents, and her bank card. This completely contradicted the statements of her relatives about her supposedly planned departure. None of the neighbors had seen her leave the house. No one had seen a taxi, a bus, or even a random passerby who could have confirmed her departure. The deception was exposed fairly quickly. After the police officially reported Patricia missing and appealed to the public, new information came in. Some witnesses reported that Kieran and Louise's behavior seemed strange. They avoided conversation, did not ask for help, and showed no sign of concern. All of this gradually formed a complete picture. Patricia had not left voluntarily. Within the first few days, it became clear that her disappearance had been staged to conceal something much more terrible. On June 10, 2017, a family that had come to County Wicklow for a picnic near the old military road was preparing to leave the picnic area. While searching the bushes at the side of the road for a lost item, one of them noticed something strange in the long grass and undergrowth. At first it was assumed that it was the remains of an animal, but upon closer inspection, it became clear that it was part of a human body. The police were immediately called to the scene. A large-scale search began. The area was cordoned off. Army units, forensic experts, and air support were brought in. In the following days, numerous body parts were found along the road, scattered over a considerable distance. In total, more than 100 people took part in the search. Investigators found the remains at 9 different locations along a stretch of approximately 25 kilometers. At first, identification was not possible. Based on body structure and external characteristics, it was initially assumed that the victim was a man. However, with the discovery of additional parts, this hypothesis changed. Forensic experts determined that the victim was a woman over 60 years old. However, no connection to current missing women cases was initially established. The absence of documents, clothing, and other personal belongings made identification difficult. The body fragments had been packed in various plastic bags. There were almost no traces of insects or animals. According to investigators, the body had been dismembered and disposed of at least the day before its discovery. The condition of the remains suggested that attempts had been made to protect them from rapid decomposition, possibly through low temperatures or burial. At the same time, the search for Patricia O'Connor continued in Dublin. As long as the examination of the remains yielded no results, no one connected the two cases. The police continued to work on the theory of a voluntary disappearance. The breakthrough came 3 days after the discovery. On June 12, 2017, Kieran Green presented himself at a police station. His appearance was disturbing. He was agitated, spoke quickly and incoherently, and constantly changed his words. He introduced himself as the partner of Louise O'Connor and stated that he was responsible for Patricia's death. He immediately emphasized that he had acted in self-defense. According to him, an argument had broken out between him and Patricia, which escalated into a physical altercation. He claimed that she had entered the bathroom while he was showering and had started screaming and waving a wooden stick. In response, he allegedly pushed her, causing the woman to hit her head and lose consciousness. He further stated that he panicked, put the body into his car, drove into the countryside, and buried it in a makeshift grave. A few days later, he allegedly returned to the same place, dug up the body, cut it into pieces, and scattered the parts in remote locations in the Wicklow Mountains so that, as he said, no one would find out about the incident. He added that he had acted alone and had told no one. Investigators listened to his statement, but treated it with caution. The first thing that raised doubts was the sequence of his actions. Kieran claimed that he had done everything spontaneously and had not planned anything in advance. However, when investigators examined the locations where the remains were found, they discovered signs of preparation. The body parts were in sturdy plastic bags, some of which had been hidden in hard-to-reach places. In addition, the medical examination revealed that the skull had sustained multiple injuries. This ruled out the possibility of a single blow. Cut marks were found on the bones, characteristic of the use of power tools. The tools used to inflict the injuries varied in type, which also contradicted his statement. In some places, the cuts were smooth, with vibrations typical of chainsaws. It soon became clear that the original burial had indeed taken place. However, the dismemberment of the body and its subsequent removal occurred later, using tools that required strength, time, and planning. All of this pointed to a high degree of awareness of what was happening, rather than a spontaneous reaction in the heat of the moment. The police began checking stores where tools used to dismember the body might have been purchased. They requested surveillance footage and bank card transactions from people connected to Kieran. In addition, the investigating authorities decided to re-examine the behavior of the other residents of the house. In light of his confession, Stephanie drew particular attention. Her appearance in the video, dressed in Patricia's clothes, had previously been explained as a harmless game. Now, her actions were viewed as conscious participation in covering up the traces of the crime. Louise's behavior was also reassessed. She knew about the conflict between her mother and her partner, but did nothing. Her earlier statements turned out to be incomplete and partly contradictory. Kieran's confession became the starting point for a broader investigation. Now, not only he, but everyone who had been in the house in the days before Patricia's disappearance came under suspicion. The crime was no longer viewed as a random event. The details pointed to the involvement of several people and an attempt to conceal the crime through coordinated actions. One of the next steps in the investigation was to examine the links between Kieran and other men connected to the family. Attention turned to Keith Johnston, Louise's former partner. Although he did not live in the house permanently, he remained in contact with her and was a frequent visitor. Investigators discovered that shortly after the murder, Keith had accompanied Kieran while shopping at a hardware store. Surveillance cameras captured the two men selecting saws, heavy-duty bags, chemical liquids, and protective gloves. When the timing of the transaction was verified, it became clear that the purchases had been made after Patricia's presumed death. This refuted the version of a panicked reaction and proved that the actions had been planned and thought through. Later, an anonymous source revealed that some of the tools may have been discarded near a river. A specialized search team combed the area and found 2 electric saws and an axe. The investigation confirmed that these items had been used for the dismemberment. One of the blades contained microscopic particles of bone tissue that matched Patricia's remains. All family members were questioned again. Louise changed her statement. While she had previously insisted that Patricia had left the house voluntarily, she now claimed that she had believed Kieran's words and knew nothing about the details. Her interrogation lasted several hours. She stated that Stephanie had only helped when asked and that Augustine had noticed nothing. Patricia's son Richard, however, gave contradictory statements. He reported that his mother had not left the house on the day of her disappearance and that the suitcase used in the staging had been found in his father's bedroom. Richard's testimony was important because he was the only family member not involved in the cover-up. He confirmed that Louise had prevented him from going to the police, insisting that their mother had simply left. This behavior finally convinced investigators that the concealment of the crime was not limited to one person. The police compiled a list of all the additional locations where the remains had been found and officially recognized them as crime scenes. In addition to the house, wooded areas, the original burial site and the road along which the body parts had been transported were documented. The picture was now complete: murder, dismemberment, transportation, a staged disappearance, and a mutual agreement to remain silent. In January 2020, the trial for the murder of Patricia O'Connor began in Dublin. 5 people appeared in court: Kieran Green, Louise O'Connor, Stephanie O'Connor, Keith Johnston, and Augustine O'Connor. They were all charged with various crimes. They were accused of different forms of involvement, ranging from committing murder to concealing evidence and obstructing the investigation. The judge warned that the trial would be long and complex, with a large amount of evidence to be presented. The prosecution presented a complete chronology of events. According to their version, Patricia died in her home on the night of May 29. Kieran struck her several blows to the head, inflicting fatal injuries. The body was then hidden, later dismembered, and taken to remote areas. The staging of her disappearance began that very day. Stephanie dressed in her grandmother's clothes and was captured by a street surveillance camera. The suitcase used in the staging was later found in the house, definitively refuting the version of a voluntary departure. The defense immediately took a defensive stance. Kieran, who had previously admitted guilt, changed his statement in court. He claimed that he had not committed the murder, but had only agreed to take responsibility at the family's request. He named Augustine as a possible murderer, claiming that he had argued with Patricia and then hit her with a crowbar. According to Kieran, after the incident, Louise had convinced him to take the blame and promised him support in return. This turn of events was unexpected, since Kieran had maintained a different position for more than 2 years. Louise refused to confess, claiming that she knew nothing about her mother's death or Kieran's actions. She explained Stephanie's involvement in the staging by saying that she had believed her partner's words and saw no reason to doubt them. The prosecution presented Richard's statement, in which he pointed to his sister's active role in covering up the crime. The prosecution also presented video footage showing Kieran and Keith purchasing saws, bags, and other materials. It also showed footage of the car used to transport the body parts. Separate medical reports were submitted, confirming multiple blows to the head and traces of dismemberment carried out with electric tools. This contradicted the claim that the death had been accidental as the result of an attack. During the trial, the defense attempted to shift the focus to the alleged unreliability of the video evidence. However, the court rejected those arguments. There were also attempts to shift blame onto the other defendants. Each defendant tried to downplay their role. Kieran blamed Augustine, Louise, and Keith. Louise blamed Kieran. Stephanie claimed that she had acted on her mother's instructions. Keith insisted that he did not know what the tools had been purchased for. Augustine claimed that he had simply believed his daughter's words. The prosecution emphasized the consistency of the actions and the coordinated lies supported by all family members. The court heard testimony confirming that the household knew about Patricia's death, but concealed this fact through coordinated actions. The conclusion was clear. It was not an impulsive reaction to a coincidence, but a collective attempt to cover up the traces of the murder. In February 2020, the court found Kieran Green guilty of murdering Patricia O'Connor. The aggravating circumstances included the absence of signs of self-defense, the dismemberment of the body, and the attempt to obstruct the investigation. He was later sentenced to life imprisonment. Stephanie O'Connor, the granddaughter of the deceased, was sentenced to 18 months in prison. She was found guilty of misleading the investigation by participating in the staging of Patricia's alleged departure. CCTV cameras had captured her wearing her grandmother's clothes and carrying a suitcase. The defense insisted that the daughter had only been following her mother's instructions. However, the court assessed her actions as deliberate and purposeful. Louise O'Connor was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. The court found that she had obstructed the course of justice, coordinated false statements, and concealed evidence. The sentence was justified not only by her involvement, but also by the pressure she exerted on other family members, including attempts to prevent her brother from going to the police. Louise denied the allegations, but none of her explanations matched the established facts. Keith Johnston, Louise's former partner, was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Video footage shown in court confirmed his involvement in purchasing the tools used to dismember the body. The court found no evidence of his involvement in the murder itself, but did note that he had contributed to covering up the traces of the crime. Before the trial began, Augustine O'Connor admitted that he had withheld information about the true circumstances from the police. He confirmed that he had known about Patricia's death, but deliberately maintained the false version that she had left the house. For this, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. Taking into account his age and his partial cooperation with the investigating authorities, the court ruled that he could serve his sentence with the possibility of suspension after 1 year. The actual prison terms differed from the sentences imposed. Stephanie was released after only 8 months. After her release, she made no comment and withdrew completely from public life. Augustine spent approximately 13 months in prison and was then also released. Louise was released in 2022 after serving almost 2 years. Keith was also released in 2022. Media reports described his public appearances, but his behavior showed no sign of remorse or distress. Thus, Kieran Green is the only one who continued serving the full weight of his sentence. He is serving his sentence in a maximum security prison. The likelihood of his release is extremely low. The court found that the actions of all those convicted were not aimed at helping, but at covering up the crime. Despite their varying degrees of involvement, all the adult family members connected to the house contributed to disinformation and an attempt to evade responsibility. Patricia O'Connor was buried without public announcement. The funeral service was closed to the public. Only a few family members received an invitation. None of the deceased woman's sisters were informed. The relatives learned about the funeral from the news after it had already taken place. Former colleagues, neighbors, and acquaintances from her hometown were not allowed to attend the ceremony. The decision to hold a private funeral was justified by the need for privacy. However, it later became clear that this was a continuation of the attempt to isolate Patricia's memory. The exclusion of next of kin from the funeral confirmed the rift within the family and showed that some of those involved continued to distance themselves from the opinions of others even after the trial. After his release, Augustine O'Connor inherited the house where Patricia had died and gained access to her bank accounts. A few months later, he sold the property for a large sum. Although Louise was her daughter, she received nothing from the estate. Her name was not even mentioned in the official obituary. According to Richard, their father accused Louise of moral violence and deliberately excluded her from his will. By the time of his death in 2024, Augustine had not reconciled with his daughter or grandchildren. His final decisions only confirmed that he had definitively distanced himself from those involved in this story. After his release, Keith Johnston spoke almost not at all about what had happened. Photos of him taken by paparazzi appeared in newspapers. In them, he looked calm, showing no signs of remorse or distress. Many felt that the sentences imposed on him and the others were too lenient compared to the gravity of the crime. A public memorial service in honor of Patricia O'Connor was not held. Her name appeared neither in city chronicles nor in public initiatives. Those who had known her before said that she had dedicated her life to caring for others, but ended in loneliness and betrayal. The story ended with court sentences, but it did not provide a complete answer to the most important question. None of the condemned ever explained why they considered it permissible to eliminate Patricia. The most horrifying part remained incomprehensible. How could the family to whom she had devoted her life decide on her destruction? Thanks for watching and take care.